Hi, welcome back to Travel with Ketan. With me, Ketan Joshi, biker, backpacker, and travel writer. As you know, I am the author of the Three Men on Motorcycle series, and today we are doing a reading from my second book, Three Men Ride Again. The Amigos Ride to Spiti. So we are starting this story as there is the three amigos, me, Delzad, and Aditya. These three guys out here. Here, here. I'm riding to Spiti. They started riding from Simla, and we are moving along the Satluj Valley, and we are going to Sangla. So without any further ado, let us join the story. Simla to Sangla. Simla to Sangla. The morning dawned sunny and clear, and our hearts rejoiced at the sight of the blue sky. We are happy to have survived last night. Remember last night when we were homeless in Simla? If not, just take out that episode. Amazing. We are happy to have survived last night, and we are even happier to get back on the roads and enjoy what promised to be an awesome ride. Yeah, awesome ride, baby. We would be crossing the beautiful green Shivalik range, and we would be seeing Himachal in all its glory. I was really looking forward to this. The plan was very simple. We would be traveling the old Hindustan-Tibet road, or it is known rather boringly as NH22. At least it was known as NH22. Sometime back, the government changed the number of all the highways, and it doesn't seem to have told anybody about it yet. So it's all very confusing. The maps and the old highway markers say one name, and the online maps like Google and the new highway markers say another thing. And soon you are hopelessly confused as to where you are and end up asking the locals for directions. For example, the old Bombay Goa highway was known as NH17. Everybody knows the NH17. But now it is renamed as NH66. So you'll be going on this road into NH17. Suddenly you are on NH66. Hey, what is this? So they have some complex rationale for this new numbering. North-south highways will have even numbers. East-west highways will have odd numbers. The big roads will have single digit. The little ones will have multiple digits. And the numbers will increase. North-south highways will increase the numbers from east to west. And east-west highways will increase the numbers from north to south. In addition to that, suffixes will be added to highways for spin-offs and small stretches. And more wrinkles will be added as and when these babus think of something. And so now your numbers like 926A, 527B, and highways which are running diagonally can use any number. It makes everything so logical. Some pompous prick in the highways department would have thought. Now anyone can guess that NH4 will be East India, while NH44 will be somewhere West India, but running from east to west. Whatever, west to east, something. Stupid bloody idiots. Earlier we all knew the NH4 was the Bombay-Bangalore highway which runs through Pune. So as far as we are concerned, from Bombay you go to Pune, take NH4. Simple. Everyone knew it. Going to Pune, take NH4. But now if you try to take NH4, you'll be in a problem because guess where is NH4? I will send you a chocolate right through the screen if you can guess. Think. Now NH4 is entirely in the island of Andaman Nicobar. You drive too long in it, it will fall into the sea. Now the old NH4 is now NH48. Why? I mean, why? How does this benefit anyone? What a most idiotic idea. There might be some minor confusion, they say, but I really don't give a fuck. A little confusion is good for you. It will make you think. Let exercise for your brain, and will make you just jump up and down in rage and make you pick up rocks and throw them. Let exercise for your body. See, the highway authority is making you fit in mind and body. Bloody idiots. Coming back to the plan, we are going to take the erstwhile Hindustan Tibet road, now renamed as NH22. The old one, mind. If you try to take the new NH22, if you put on Google right now and say I want to travel NH22, you will go from Bihar to Jharkhand. The old NH22 is now the new NH5. Forget it. Just let's hit the road. We suited up in all our gear. Riding boots, riding pant, riding jacket, riding gloves, balaclava, helmet, hydration pack, waist pouch, and clumped down to our bikes, startling all the other denizens of the hotel, who must have thought we were aliens coming to abduct them and insert anal probes or something. It was a great relief to leave that Fleabag hotel. We are grateful for the shelter of last night, no doubt, but sincerely wished never to see it again. The air was wonderful after the night's rain, and it was a great feeling to kick-start the bike and hear it roar. You can never get over that feeling of joy. You start your Enfield first thing in the morning. She seems to greet you with a joyful roar, and the vibrating of the bike is like a great beast simply itching to get on with things and show you a great time. When we were kids, we used to watch this really cheesy serial called He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. It was really crappy, but we loved it. The titular character was a prince who's got a magic sword. And then when he draws it and shouts, "By the power of Grayskull, I have the power!" The bolt of lightning. And he turns into a scantily clad muscle man called He-Man. And then he points his sword at his cowardly pet, which transforms into a snarling saddle-wearing monster called Thundercat. And he jumps on it and bounds off somewhere to fight evil in his jockstraps or do something suitably heroic. I get the same thrill from sitting on my bike and kick-starting it. And I still shout, "By the power of Grayskull!" at times and pretend that I'm riding the fabulous Thundercat. At other times, I just shout, "Start, you stupid bike! Start! Start! When the bike is not in the mood and simply says, "Fuck you," to all my kicking and button pushing. But today, it started most obliging. And Adi shouted, as the vibration of the bike tickled his balls and gave a spontaneous orgasm when we set out from Shimla. It was the most pleasant road once we left the city behind, and we were surrounded by the Shivalik mountains. Above us was the clear blue sky with cotton wool clouds. The breeze was fresh and cold, the bike was running like a dream, and the roads were in great condition and of a pleasantly twisty nature. I don't like straight roads much. The fun of riding is when the roads are full of twists and bends and you can lean from one side of to another and really bank the vehicle. If you can bank it enough to get the foot pegs to scrape the road and create a shower of sparks, then it's a little bit of paradise right there. Similar to Sangla wasn't that much of a distance. Well, it's not a distance as planes go, but it's about 240 kilometers. But it's quite a distance on the mountains. And we're planning to do it leisurely and enjoy the greenery and mountains and reach Sangla by early evening so as to have time to chill out and take in the scenery. So we weren't riding very fast, just enough to bank the bike here and there. And anyway, it wasn't safe to really speed up. The roads are mountain roads after all, twisty and occasionally wet, with a valley on one side where you would take high dives if you're not careful. This is the heart of apple country. Most of the apples grown in India are grown in these mountain regions. The mountains are full of apple orchards as far as the eye can see. And since we are in the heart of apple country and it was harvest season, we had to be careful of trucks rushing here and there to pick up stocks. Apples are very big business here, as they supply apples to the entire country and also export a bit. And it's a major cash crop and is responsible for a fair bit of the economy. Himachal has among the highest per capita incomes in India, partly because of this apple trade. The wholesale apple dealers have set up temporary purchase depots, which is basically a tent where the dealers sat and awaited farmers who would come there with their loads of apples. They would bargain and buy apples by the truckload from the small farmers, collate them all together, and then send them down to the towns from where they would be sent all over India. You have to be careful of these trucks as they drive like maniacs, as they want to go up and down from depots to towns as fast as possible so they can maximize the amount of apples they collect. The apple industry in these parts has got a fascinating history. It was all started by one man, an American called Samuel Evans Stokes. Sam Stokes was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1882 to a very rich family. His dad owned a large elevator company and was rolling in the stuff. He wanted to make Sammy join the family business, but Sam wanted to do something different. He wanted to do something good in the world. Just think of the context here. This is the 1900s, before the First World War. This was the roaring 20s when everything was booming. This is the Great Gatsby, the jazz era. Everybody is rich, everybody is rolling in the stuff. And the US was the place to be. This guy was filthy rich. His dad owned a huge elevator company. He could have done whatever he wanted. He could have lived the life of Riley. He could have gone on the grand tour to Europe. He could have become a big industrialist. He could have become a politician. He could live in the lap of luxury. But instead, at the tender age of just 22, he came to India. India at that time was a possession of the British Empire, which Americans were not particularly fond of. And why did he come to India? To meet a Maharaja? No, he came to work in a leper colony. A leper colony. And take care of paupers with stinky, filthy, rotting bodies whose body parts are literally rotting and falling off. He did this for 8 years, living with lepers and taking care of them. Then he fell in love with a local girl and married her in 1912, whereon he left his life of utter poverty, and he had inherited a lot of money after his father died. And he used his money to buy land and become a local farmer and settle down in the village. Put this in a bit of context. Okay, this was the height of British Empire glory. The time when Kipling wrote Recessional and there was a Grand Darbar and all that kind of stuff. The absolute high summer of the British Empire, where the sun never set on the British Empire. They rolled from sea to rolling sea, from palm to pine, all that crap. And the British, these empire builders, were at their racist worst. They looked down intensely on all the people they ruled, all the colored people, Africans, Indians, Chinese, Japanese, Malays. They hated the lot of them. They hated anybody who was not Anglo-Saxon. They hated European, they hated Jews, they hated Italians, they hated anything and everybody. Dogs and Indians not allowed was a sign displayed commonly in white areas in India. And there was nothing lower in their eyes than a white man marrying a colored girl. Keep one eye on the side, fine. Screw her, fine. Even have some half-caste mulatto bastards. Very common phrase in Victorian books. Fine. So long as they hide it decently. Keep her in the kitchen kind of thing. But to actually marry a native, oh my god, what a sin. To actually marry a native must have made him an utter outcast to all British society, which meant basically all white society. So Stokes had immense moral courage to defy all of society and do what he felt was correct. Screw you, basically. Screw you, Britishers. Screw you, white guys. Stokes enjoyed a happy married life and had 5 children, and he was an industrious farmer. But he must have been troubled by all the poverty around him. It was the early 1900s after all, and life in these mountains was pretty fucked. No roads, no education, no infrastructure, no industry, no money basically, poverty all around, basic subsistence farming, and dense jungles full of wild animals. No money at all. So how could he improve the economy of the region? What could he grow that was easy to maintain and lucrative to sell? The answer came to me in a flash. Apples. Yes, after all, from Pennsylvania, the apple country, heart of apple country of the US. He must have been reminded of his childhood in Pennsylvania and the apple orchards there, and he tried to improve his land by planting apple trees. This was a time of high noon for apple scientist kind of farming in the US, where these guys were constantly tinkering and coming out with new varieties of apples. and they're constantly experimenting with developing new varieties of apple by crossbreeding and transplanting and all that stuff. And they had recently developed one variety which Stokes felt would do well in this region. It was called the Red Delicious. He planted this new breed of apples and had a bumper crop, and he made good money. And this got all the locals interested. He taught the locals apple farming and used his standing as a white man, not just any white man, but a rich, educated white man, to open doors in Delhi and introduce them to apple exporters. Those guys wouldn't have given these hill bumpkins time of day if not for Stokes. Once the apple started doing well and the money started flowing in, it started a virtual cycle of prosperity. He is making money, why can't I make money? I'll also, plant apples kind of thing. Roads started being made, money sloshed around the economy and found its way into everyone's pockets. The economy was invigorated and the whole country was benefited. The entire apple industry in India, or at least in Himachal, owes its existence to one man, Samuel Stokes. And no one even remembers his name today. Such is life. I was thinking of this as we passed verdant apple orchards, where you could see apples growing on the trees. I thought of stopping and picking a few, but Hadi was nervous that an angry farmer would come and shoot us for trespassing and stealing his apples. I thought we might stop somewhere and buy some fresh apples. But to my sadness, these guys pick apples which are still unripe and green, so they can ripen on the way to the markets. So there are no ripe apples available for sale. What's a pity. It was a totally wholesale setup. But I enjoyed myself watching the frenzied negotiations between the farmer and the wholesale buyer. The farmer would come with a truck full of apples and theoretically could just drive off to the next buyer if he didn't get his price. The buyer wanted to get his apple as cheap as possible but not allow that farmer to go off. So there was an energetic discussion which was quite fun to hear. नहीं इतना कैसे होता है भाऊजी मुझे सिर्फ आपका प्यार चाहिए एप्पल तो आएगा अगले साल भी आएगा ये वो ऑल लाइक टिपिकल सेलर बुलशिट. We crossed Thiog and Narkanda and stopped at Rampur for a chai. Rampur looks like a dusty little town now, but this used to be the capital of the kingdom of Bushar, Rampur Bushar, which was the largest of the hill states. It was an important point on the trade routes with Tibet and was part of the minor Silk routes. It was also the starting point for the pilgrimage to Mount Kailash for Indians to go to Mount Kailash, and therefore used to get a significant amount of religious traffic as well. It was obviously totally politically dominated by the British, and it acceded to the Indian Union in 1948 and became part of the state of, Punjab, then Himachal Pradesh. And so they have a nice little palace, the Padam Palace, an ancient temple and stuff, but we didn't really go to see them. I did see them later, but at that point we didn't. Interestingly, the royal family of Rampur Bushehr is still involved in politics, and in fact, the Raja of Bushehr is or was till quite recently the chief minister of Himachal Pradesh state, which is Mr. Veerbhadra Singh. There's a turnoff from Rampur to a place called Saran, where there is an ancient temple of Bhima Kali, which was the presiding deity of Bushehr state. It's a beautiful historic wooden temple. Wasted on these guys. I'm sure these two amigos would not be interested in seeing it. Adi was Mr. Perpetual Motion, who just wanted to keep moving and you just buy it together, high. And that was also not particularly interested. We had passed by the famous Matan temple in Anantnag, Kashmir, without stopping on our last ride. So I had no great hopes of getting them interested in the Bhima Kali temple of Saran. I had been to Bhima Kali with Bharti when we had come here for the first time. You can read about that story in One Man Goes on a Bus. Continuing on the road, we passed by the dam site of the giant Nathpa Jakhri hydroelectric project at Wangtu, which was quite an imposing sight. It's a humongous freaking dam on the Satluj, and it's a frightening sight in my opinion. All these giant dam sites freak me out a bit. Just to think that a bunch of tiny two-legged mammals can stop such a giant powerful river and fuck it up entirely. It may be a temple of modern India, But to see the tiny trickle of the river left after the dam is quite depressing. It's an ecological disaster for the downstream river area. The riverbed after the dam was completely dry and the riverine ecosystem must have been totally destroyed. It's great to have electricity, to be sure. The entire human slaveless revolution of society has happened because of electric power doing the work instead of human power. Just imagine the poorest man today lives in greater comfort than the richest Maharajas of yesterday by using electric fans and lights and elevators and refrigerators and TVs and computers and whatnot. Electricity is wonderful, but it would be great if we could do it in a less ecology damaging way. Solar power should be explored as much as possible so that we can avoid the wholesale damming of rivers and destruction of nature. From Wangtu, Sangla is just a short distance away and we could accomplish our plan of reaching there earlier and chilling out. If not for one small detail. What was the detail? The detail was there's no road. There was no road. A giant landslide had come and buried that thing beneath the brand new mountain. The highway was completely blocked. What to do? The road guys had built a diversion. So, at a place called Tapri, they created a new temporary road with earth movers and JCBs. And this was a wild and unpaved road. There was no road, it was basically a flat piece of mountain. Woo! Baba screamed in delight. He loved off-roading, and the worse the road, the better. He went full speed into that fucked up road, weaving left and right to hit the worst patches he could. Most people try to avoid bad patches. Baba did it to hit the bad patches. Damn, yay! Bad roads, stones, mud, a chance to kill myself. Yay! We could hear him roaring as he zoomed off in a cloud of dust. Adi also whooped in delight and followed Delzad into the mountain. Bumpy roads! I can get the bike to vibrate more! My ball will get massage! Erotic thrills! Here I come! And he also vanished in a cloud of dust. I sighed and followed them. I like a bit of off-roading myself, though I'm not hardcore like these guys. It was just that I was thinking that the day of ride for the day was already over and I had sort of switched off mentally and I was already looking forward to exploring the beauties of Sangla Valley. But the thrill was just beginning. The Tapri bypass was a real killer of a road. It was not a road, it was just a flattish part of mountain. And it was amazing fun to ride on. Once I got over my this thing, it was like very challenging and great fun. There's no road, as I said, it was just a gravel path full of stones and rocks. It was narrow and twisty with one mountain on one side and a big hole on the other. Look up at the scenery and say, and next thing you know, you'll be airborne like Wily Coyote chasing the roadrunner and you'll be falling into the canyon with anvils and other Acme products falling on top of him. I was grimly riding while looking at the road, trying to figure out the best way between the sundry rocks and holes, and I happened to look up and I screamed in terror. There was a huge bus, the Himachal Roadways bus coming at full speed towards me. It was as if he hated all motorbikes and motorbikers and me personally and was determined to crush me into tiny bits under his wheels and cackle loudly like a mountain Rakshasa. The road was so narrow that there simply couldn't be any room for both of us. It was a high jump for me for sure. I screamed like a little girl and squeezed my bike against the mountainside. Oh, save me! And the road seemed to magically widen a little bit. And the bus roared by me. And I imagined that I could hear the driver groan and say, "Missed him, damn it!" I gasped and tried to catch my breath as my heart hammered against my ribcage. I composed myself for a second and started riding again and again screamed, another bus barreling down on me. Again I cowered against the road and the road expanded magically and he went off in another cloud of dust. I got the hell out of there before a third bus could come and I'd be third time lucky. The road was temporary and therefore small and narrow and was taking care of the load of all the traffic on the highway. Cars, buses, army vehicles, everybody. All kinds of giant vehicles were going up and down the road and the road seemed to magically expand just a little bit to allow them to gingerly pass each other. The mountain itself looked very unstable with small rocks rolling down every now and then, and all the drivers wanted to get off it as soon as possible. We rattled and rolled over the mountain for quite some time. The path went entirely around that mountain and finally came back snapped against a traffic jam. A traffic jam. What now? Doing the biker thing, we took the side path and bypassed the jam and came to the start, the head of the jam, and saw that the temporary road was also blocked by a landslide. Boulders the size of houses were strewn across the path, and all traffic had stopped on both sides, waiting for someone to clear the road. Dale and Adi had parked their bikes and were standing around with the helmets off, and I went and joined them. What's up? They're planning to dynamite that giant rock in the middle of the road. What fun! Fun? Sure! I never seen dynamite in action before. It'll be great to see. Yeah, that's true. That'll be amazing. We stood there waiting and enjoying the cool breeze and the warm sun and the beautiful scenery and the silence and the fact that we weren't bouncing and rattling on that rocky road. And after some time, they blew a siren to warn everybody, and then boom! The explosion rocked the place and blew the giant rock to smithereens. And we all cheered, yay! Everybody made a rush for the vehicles, like plane goers do. As soon as the plane landed, they get up and pick up their bags from the overhead bin and then stand like idiots waiting for something to happen. Everyone started their engines and revved and blew horns. But the guy manning the barricade was unmoved. He waited until he had got the all clear from the road team, and only then did he allow the traffic to move. Finally, we are back on the highway. NH22, 5, whatever, some highway. And we went on until we came to the village of Karcham. Karcham was the home of yet another major hydroelectric project. There are actually 3 dams on this unfortunate river. The most downstream one was the one we had crossed earlier, the Natpa Jakri one, we had crossed at Rampur. Now this giant fellow, which is the Karcham Wangtu hydroelectric project. And upstream of that, where we were going, Sangla, there was the Baspa Valley project, where the Baspa river comes down to join the Satluj. The scale of the project was simply staggering. 3 dams back to back. Just think how many billions of dollars of investment. The Karcham Wangtu and the Baspa Valley project was sold recently for 9,700 crores. 9,700 crores. That's 9700,000,000,000 rupees. My head hurts when I try to think of these numbers. There are 21 hydroelectric projects in Himachal alone. 21. Just imagine, one project went for 9,700 crores. How much for 21 projects? Just imagine the scale of investment that has gone into Himachal. The mind boggles I say. Can you just imagine what it has done to the area? It had completely screwed up the ecology of the river system and the mountains beyond repair, because nobody cares what these guys are up to. No environment guy is going to come and check. No ministry fellow is going to which are they doing a good job. This kind of money must have done huge harm to the money ecosystem as well. The corruption must have been off the scale. Just imagine, even a small percentage of 9,700 crores. Apart from corruption, the companies bought out land from the local Himachali people for huge prices. This rocky piece of shit land was worth nothing at all, but they got paid huge amounts of money. And suddenly every guy in the village had lakhs of rupees. This impecunious tribe, for generations they never had 2 pennies to rub together, and now suddenly all of them have lakhs of rupees. But this is a one-time money, and when they spend it off, they will be moneyless and landless. This has also caused great shake-up in local social systems. It would have smashed the current whatever social system to smithereens. I read this story in the newspaper where 2 local guys got into a fight when one guy asked the other guy to tie shoelaces. Why he wanted that guy? Anyway, never mind. So other guy was insulted. Bastard, how dare you tell me to tie a shoelace, man? You are insulting me. So the first guy said, Acha, I'm insulting you. Let's see how much your honor costs. Will you tie my shoelace for free? No, obviously, bugger off. Will you tie it for 1 million rupees? Yes, I would tie your shoelace for 1 million rupees. Will you tie it for 10 rupees? What the fuck do you think I am? Well, you already proved that your honor is for sale. Now, the only thing is to figure out what is the price. So he said, okay, my honor is for sale. What money are you offering? And finally, it came down that the first guy gave the second guy 10,000 rupees just to make a point, to make that guy tie his shoelace. 10,000 rupees. That bugger's annual income would not have been 10,000 rupees before this dam. Just think what has happened to their heads. We left the NH at Karcham and we crossed into the Baspa Valley, which is the Sangla Valley basically, where the river Baspa flows. It was dark by then, and we were thundering along the valley in the dark, lit only by our headlights. What a feeling that was. That was amazing. I'm telling you, it was amazing. Alone in the mountains, only the three of us. Our bikes growling happily beneath us. The utter silence of that road, with only the roar of the river and the thumping of our bikes. The increasing cold as the night took hold. The twisty mountain road. The first glimmering of the stars coming out. It was an amazing experience. We finally reached Sangla village and we checked into the first hotel we could find. And luckily it turned out to be a very nice, comfortable place. We had a nice dinner. We went for a short stroll in the village before dropping off to sleep.
Enfield Bullet, गजब की सवारी.
And that's it. That's it for this chapter. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, please check out the earlier chapters if you have not done so as yet. So you'll enjoy the book even more. Do check out this book. This book on Amazon. And the entire 3 Men on Motorcycle series, and in fact all my other books as well. I got another series called the One Man Goes Backpacking series. Do check them out. Do subscribe to this podcast, not a podcast, subscribe to this YouTube thing and ring that bell thingy so that you'll come to know when new videos are posted. If you like listening to this stuff and want an option to listen in your car or while walking, driving, jogging, whatever, I do have a podcast. It should be somewhere on the screen. You can see it on Spotify, Google Podcasts, whatever. The link is in the description. Check out my website. Keep an eye on my website because it's got a lot of interesting stuff, including photos of all this stuff and my blog. We'll see you for the next part of our adventure. See you next time. Bye.